Welcome back to a podcast to answer your questions on addiction, recovery, and mental health by Wiseman Method Opioid Treatment Specialists and Rapid Detox Center. I'm your co-host, Dwight Hurst, joined by Claire Wiseman and David Livingston. David and Claire, I have what I hope is an interesting question. I think it's an interesting question anyway. Today, I want to talk about the difficulty people may have coping with some of the after effects that we don't usually talk about when it comes to sobriety. The abuse of alcohol or other drugs can leave people with some residual health problems, perhaps new functional limitations. Sometimes some of that is just age because they haven't been attending their health and it's been a long time. Sometimes it's things that are actually caused by the substance. And so basically the question is which of those things how do they impact people once they get sober and start managing their health again? And what do we do to manage that?
One of the biggest issues that I see is the expectations of patients that have been using substance for 10 years to want to get detox and feel like they felt 10 years ago. And not just because of the effects that, the drug could have had on their health. And I'm not just saying physically, but always mentally. There is a consequence of a certain way that you feel for a very long time. It's difficult to transition to another type of feeling. So physically, emotionally, all the above, there are effects of the substance. So to expect to feel like you felt 10 years ago, it's impossible. Mm-hmm. Regardless, if you didn't use any substance, you couldn't feel like you felt 10 years ago. So I think that expectation is something that we try to make real clear for the patients that, they are not 40 anymore, they're 50. So, and they haven't really taken care of their body as they should have for the last 10 years. So is dealing with realistic expectations.
That's such a huge factor that we see coming back around is expectations.
Correct. And supporting them from where they are once they've been detoxed and the things they can do to get better and feel better. So regardless, they can always work on their health and, get better. You don't know what you feel when you don't know where you are physically or emotionally while there is a blanket between you and your whole body.
I always remember someone that I met years ago who was heavily into, it was methamphetamine abuse, but they had been clean for years from it, and they had a relapse to full use following the death of a family member. And the interesting thing was they were caught up in that for months and months. I don't know if it was a whole year or whatever it was, but they said they sort of got reoriented back on their healthy. They started doing some therapy again. They started, just whatever, the things that they did to be healthy, and they stopped using meth. What happened was all the grief landed squarely on their shoulders just as if it had just happened. And they always use that example to say, you're not really escaping what you think you're escaping sometimes through substance use. You're just delaying. And I've always thought that was very interesting.
It is. I agree 1,000%.
Right.
David?
That we always remember ourselves on our best day. It's just, it's right. I think we all do. And I mean, I've seen that so often. It's like the expectation that you get detoxed and you're going to be at your best day. And if something doesn't feel right, that there's kind of a panic, but part of it is also that the nervous system is so conditioned to feel like you need an opioid or something to make it right, because often that's a sign that you're going into some withdrawals or something. So you have this conditioned reflex that's deep, because it goes from the nervous system into the emotional life and the brain, and so over time that gets maybe a little bit of time, maybe probably 20 days, that unwinds. And that conditioning really starts to give way, and you start to go through some ups and downs and realize, I didn't feel so great yesterday, but I feel pretty good today. And then you go through a few more of those ups and downs, and you realize, okay, I'm just getting a new baseline and then you start to regulate things like sleep and get some exercise and all the kind of the regulating processes that that help us all sleep better and everything. And then you start to get those things in line, and then if there is some underlying anxiety or things that beyond sort of the early part of recovery, then you can begin to address that, whether it's situational or it's more systemically based or whatever it is. And I think a lot of what people call pause is an inability to differentiate these aspects, because they can't even remember, a lot of it, and some of it's new, and sometimes their lives are very different. So there's a lot to kind of get oriented to, you might say.
Yeah, meeting people who have been in decades of use and decades of substance abuse to that point. One of the things that I hear from some people, if it's been, I hit adulthood, start abusing alcohol and drugs. Next thing I know, I'm 55 and I'm finally starting to get away from it. And now for those people, it's not even a question. Everybody around them might be talking about, reclaiming your health. And for them, it's like, no, I'm claiming I don't know what it's like to be free of these substances. I don't know what it's like. I've never done it. So therefore, it's a whole new thing to learn. And I think sometimes, as I know we like to bring this up sometimes on this program, is that the advertisement for sobriety sometimes makes it seem like, hey, stop using, you're going to feel great. Well, as if it happens immediately, instead of like, stop using, you're going to find a lot of aches and pains and some psychological things you have to confront, and you're going to have to do a lot of work before it starts being really, really, fun. But your health is, you'll be better, and it'll eventually, it's worth it. But we don't always advertise that part. We don't know. We're not always honest with people, because I just mean we as humans. Sometimes people are so eager for their loved one or their client or patient to stop that they just make it sound like it's great to stop, instead of saying, all right, let's get ready for it'll be hard, but it'll be worth it. And that's a different
But I think
story.
we're talking about two different things there, Dwight. One is, it is great to stop. It is great to stop because the consequences of continuing are horrible, and you're truly not living life. Mm-hmm. You're just, navigating through it.
Absolutely.
Now, the promise that life and life's terms is always going to be great, that doesn't exist, not for somebody that use opioids or alcohol or any other drug, or for any of us. Some people can have bad days, some people can have bad weeks, some people can have a bad year. It's just, again, relearning tools of how to deal with those emotionally and physically. But then going back again, that, we are always a work in progress, and we can always, and should always work to be better. And when I say to be better, it's not just to be better to the world, but to ourselves. Take care of ourselves a little better than we did before. Period. Regardless of where we are and what we're going through.
And kind of to that end, I remember I was a very good tennis player in college, and then I stopped playing tennis for a long time. Didn't really play much for probably a couple decades. And then I came back to playing, and I thought, I'm just going to kind of pick up. And I was terrible. And I couldn't believe how bad I was, actually. And then I'm listening to this podcast by a neurologist. I think it was a Huberman podcast. It was really excellent. And he was saying, well, actually, as adults, we can learn and improve just like we could when we were younger. The problem is, it's like you have to grind it out as an adult. You have to understand that the learning that takes place earlier in our life and the way our brain absorbs, it can still do as an adult, but it's far, far more effort as we're older because the brain doesn't just sort of soak it in. And when I oriented myself to that idea and actually decided, you know what, I'm gonna just work at it. Over time, it actually all came back, and I was like, okay, well, I mean, now obviously you're whatever age you are, you're that age, and you're not going to be I'm not playing tennis as a 20-year-old, but what the thing that was so profound for me is I was oriented to, like you're saying, Claire, you got to work at it. I was oriented to the idea of that it would be the way it was earlier, and it wasn't. It was much harder. But once I oriented myself to that, and I heard him go through the whole reasoning for that, it oriented me in a way that I was like, okay, you just take it on, and then you just stay at it. Most of the reason people fail in their recoveries and stuff is they do not persist. They don't grind it out. They don't figure out and keep getting the help and the things you need and stay with it until you get there. It's the biggest reason I see people struggle.
And it's the other side of that realism, as we put it, having realistic expectations really should go both ways. And you're describing a more, what we would typically think of as positive or a hopeful take on that. It's like, I'm trying to be realistic that it's going to be hard and I have to grind it out, but also realistic about the idea that I'll get some of this back, or I will develop this new skill if I keep trying. And, something good can happen. It's keeping that hope. Yeah, it's like a hopeful part of realism, where sometimes when we talk about accepting reality on reality's terms, it just sounds like going like, ugh, I know, right? Ugh. But you're talking about an aspect of that which is also embracing the positives of our reality.
Exactly, that we can learn, just like we always have, and our brain and our body can respond. It just may be harder. And once you orient yourself towards that, and if you take it on, then you're just going at it, right? You're just working at something. And honestly, one of the things that actually is most effective in helping with any sort of anxiety, depression, so forth, is just having a trajectory of a future goal that you can realistically understand you can get to. And so when people are working at those things, it helps ward off all of those things for everybody. In fact, it's two of the biggest factors that it helps with. So it's when people begin to doubt themselves and give up, or don't really understand what it's going to take. It's not necessarily what everybody wants to hear, but again, if you orient yourself towards it, you take it on, that in itself will give you a big dopamine hit, right? Just the process of going after something and then getting the rewards of the process of, even if it's incremental changes and improvements, there's a whole process to that keeps us well.
One of the things that I was thinking about in preparation for this discussion was an aspect of self-blame. I know that I've met many people who, after some amount of substance use, they find out that they actually have either just a physical or sometimes a cognitive impairment. I've known people that were like, wow, I went to college on a scholarship and I was kind of like hot stuff, or maybe I just was very proud of my intellect and everything. And boy, after several years of the body going through this abuse, boy, my brain doesn't work as fast as it did. And I know, like you just said, sometimes that can be age, but I've known people even in a short amount of time that are like, I struggle a lot more with math than I used to, as if similar to someone getting a head injury, right, and having to cope with that. The difference being someone with a head injury, often that's a result of something outside their control. Whereas people with addiction issues, often we're trained to believe, oh, well, look at me, I'm just a big dummy, or a bad person. And by the way, I've also now injured my brain or some other part of me. And now I'm, feeling that self-blame, that self-loathing that's depressing.
I think there's a lot of factors there, Dwight, that could be, part of why they're feeling that way. That again, it could be due to a certain substance, like we have learned that benzodiazepines, do affect your brain in ways that are, irreversible.
No.
Yeah,
no, that's been actually a really scary piece of research, right?
Correct. So, benzodiazepines is more and more related to dementia, early dementia. Mm-hmm. We know that methamphetamines affects, your brain cells. Opioids, don't know enough yet. But with that said, alcohol. So that could be a factor. But there are many other factors, I think, nowadays, at this time in our lives, regardless. People are overwhelmed with everything that is going on around us. It is harder to focus on anything. We are continuously getting news or being aware of our surroundings. So where before you could focus a bit more on something, now our focus have to be divided in, a lot of different crises going on in our lives at the same time. So I think that is always, an issue that I see often. Now, not just talking about the patient, I think family members have that expectation that you're going to get treated and everything is going to go back to where it used to be 10, 20 years ago, especially parents. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know how much you guys see of that, but, yes, they started using drugs at 14. Now they are 28, but they used to be such a nice, young, kids and so focused and so great in school. And parents have that tendency to believe that they're going to get that 14-year-old back and all the experience they had for the last, 10, 15 years will be erased. Yeah. Experience that really built, who they became.
That's a really good point.
Another issue.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I have found that when I've met young people who come out with their depression, let's say they have a regrettable a overflow of depression, they can't hide it anymore, and then they start to get some treatment. And the interesting thing is that they'll be doing better, and they'll get feedback from those around them that, well, I just want our happy little girl back. I just want to see that that kid who felt like he could take on the world. I just want to see that back. And I've had to have that conversation with a few people to remind them that, hey, your child was hiding symptoms from you during that time where you want to. So don't say that to them, that I really want to see you happy again like you were a year or two ago when you were not sharing and you were feeling, too scared to let people know, and you got suicidal and you internally were dying. And, and most people, if I share that, they go, oh my gosh, I didn't mean to feel that kind of shame.
Symptoms and experiences. I mean, that you don't buy illicit drugs in the supermarket.
Yeah, that's a good point. Good point. Well, there is a whole, that's a really interesting thing to point out too, because there is a whole, like, getting to know a whole different social structure, a whole different world that maybe you didn't get to know before.
Often the pursuit of drugs is towards a pursuit of feeling good or happiness. But I think a better way to think about ourselves is, how about I'm authentic, have some peace, and as unconflicted internally and externally as possible. And and there'll be plenty of ups and downs. Even if we're living an authentic life, you're just going to feel what you do. And the good news is you don't need to worry about it so much eventually. You just get to have a full experience of being alive. And the orientation and the ease that comes with that is, to me, one of the major things that treatment is oriented to. That when people go through enough ups and downs of different cycles, what happens is they no longer have such a preference as to how they feel. They can feel differently. They can go through this. Situationally, things are going to happen in life. We're going to go through this. It's not that big a deal. And to me, that's one of the major goals of longer-term treatment. I don't care whether it's for addiction or anything. And what happens is there's less preference and there's less conflict than when you're feeling one thing. And you just feel more authentic and more human in general. And it's easier way to live.
Do you feel like, how big of a role does vulnerability play as both facilitating that, but also an obstacle? I mean, it's kind of scary at first, right?
Like, what do you mean exactly?
I just was thinking about how that level of vulnerability to be ourselves, I agree with you. It's a better way to live, and it's actually more simplistic and happy to get there, to get over that hump, to get there. I was just thinking I think that requires a lot of vulnerability at first, doesn't it?
Yeah, probably. But the vulnerability comes from becoming comfortable with being ornery and frustrated and angry when you need to, and still being able to have secure attachment. I mean, that's the hinge I see, that if people who have secure attachment and we can just be ourselves, the vulnerability is lessened. And then the ease, I mean, that's really the therapeutic dyad, where you can sit with the therapist and just kind of show up as you are. And they will, there's a space for you to kind of come as you want. You're not being pressured to be in any certain way. And over time, that there's a sense of that you can just be in a healthy, attached relationship and be authentic and be yourself. And that is, to me, one of the core benefits of what a therapeutic relationship can offer. But you're right. There are moments and times, even in therapy, where there's plenty of vulnerability, where you're taking risks and showing sides of yourself that you're not as comfortable with. And I think that's just a part of development. I'm not sure any of us escape that. As we get older, our ability to grow, it doesn't come as easy. You have to grind it out more. And this is what the neurologist was talking about.
Yeah. Because whether it's therapy or other things, or as it probably should be, some therapy and other things too, trying to add places and people into your life to where you can more safely become vulnerable and be yourself is kind of part of being. It's part of getting there, isn't it? If I'm working on being myself, I can't make people accept me, but I can try to find the people who will accept me.
You bet. You bet. And that's right. And so, that's the idea of I think of a good home, is we get to kind of be ourselves there. And, the world isn't necessarily as accommodating always, but then, you can find friends and so forth. But yes, and there's still risks. I mean, you still have to, show sides of yourself, I think, and get comfortable with it yourself and try things out.
David, don't you think there's also an issue with, maturity? A lot of these patients did not mature, miss years and years of, that ongoing maturity. So it's, and when I say maturity, I mean regarding your own feelings. Once you remove, the substance, you're dealing with somebody, maybe 27, that really is feeling and behaving like a 16.
Well, that's right. And so kind of to what you're saying, Dwight, that you knew someone who's, their parents wanted them to just be that happy, easygoing, 14-year-old again, but
Right.
but really to grow up and to be a full, you know, person means that you can be, angry and frustrated and joyful and funny and, on and on. You're not just that simple. You're not supposed to be. And so the process of kind of getting used to those sides of yourself again, as you're saying, Claire, and just, that the development has so much to do with just getting used to ourselves in different environments and with different people. So a lot of that can get sort of shut down, as you're pointing out.
Yeah, as I think about a conference I went to a long time ago, the keynote speaker was talking about his own experience of getting addiction kick up in his early life. And the example he gave, I think, goes to what you're saying. He said that he was at a party, just at school, like a dance or something, and he was feeling so much like a fish out of water and so embarrassed and so unsure of himself that when his buddy said, "Hey, come with me," and he brought him outside and had hidden a paper bag of some kind in the bushes outside the school and said, "Come with me, we're going to use this." And he never said what was in the bag, but he left that ambiguous and said everybody has something that introduces them. But what he said was, "Do you think it mattered to me at the time what was in the bag? I was depressed. I was anxious. I had problems at home. I was socially, disconnected, all those things." And said, "Do you think I cared what was in that bag if my friend who I trusted told me it was going to help me feel better right now?" and so you get back to that idea that, we don't start using just for fun, like you had just said. There's a reason behind it. And to now need a new solution for that problem is also, I think, kind of jarring, because I also think people often aren't prepared for that, because then the substance is viewed as the problem, not whatever led to it in the first place. So now I have that problem and have to deal with it without substances. Or
Gotta
illicit
start
substances.
somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Right. And childhood is hard for so many. It's hard. And right. So you got to make friends again, and you got to, and keep your life developing. But to me, the thing is, if you care and you're willing to work hard at it, it's unbelievable. To me, that's where the magic is. That I think what you said earlier, Dwight, like that, it's a hopeful view. If you can orient yourself and just, step by step, begin to make some goals and some things that you want to do and things that matter to you, and start to get to know yourself again. It's amazing over time what can get built.
I mean, hope is a big part of this message.
It's primary, and so is courage, right? Because like you're saying, and Dwight, when you feel that vulnerable, it takes courage. It takes courage to get off of the substances. It takes courage to sort of then take on, whatever felt like were limits in your life before, or difficulties, and it takes, it takes hope and takes courage, and it takes time and persistence.
What do you think helps people to develop that type of hope?
I think it's personal for everybody. I think other people who believe in you and just having some vision, I've said this before, but it's one of my favorite quotes. Einstein said, imagination is more important than intellect. And I think he's right, because you have to first imagine something. If you can imagine it, then you can find some hope. And if you can imagine it and are willing to work towards it, there's hope that is already imbued in that process. So I think one of the things that happens that is most detrimental when people are on drugs or opioids or whatever is their imagination shrinks. They stop imagining a life for themselves, and it's more about, it gets very, very small. And so I know when I'm working with someone, one of the things I really do is I try to sort of evoke and find out what they want for themselves. And it's often one of the most difficult and painful things for them to answer. And sometimes it takes a while because it's scary to hope again and vulnerable, like you were saying. So, but I think once you can imagine something, then and you're willing to work at it, then I think hope begins and comes along.
We're going to call it there for this conversation today, but we'll be back again soon. What should we talk about? Well, I'm glad you asked. You can email us info@opiates.com to ask us your questions about mental health, treatment, recovery, the addiction and detoxification process, or any of the things that we talk about here on the show. Claire and David and myself are lined up, ready and willing. The music used in the episodes is the song Medical by Clean Mind Sounds. This episode is released by Wiseman Method Opioid Treatment Specialist and Rapid Detox Center and produced by Popped Collar Productions. For Claire Wiseman and for David Livingston, I'm Dwight Hurst. Remember to keep asking questions, because if you ask questions, you can find answers. And if you find answers, you can find hope. Thanks again for listening. Talk to you soon.